All right, Hannah, thanks for being here today. I want to start by asking about your mission. You mentioned that your mission is to alleviate unnecessary suffering. Unnecessary suffering. Why is that your mission?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. My mission of my business, Heartfelt Wellbeing, is to alleviate unnecessary suffering because of my journey to the work that I'm doing now, which definitely feels like my dharma of teaching, practicing Ayurveda and yoga. And my journey was really of having my own health crises and then it leading me to a point where I had to choose a path of either following the basically the Western perspective, which would lead me to have a surgery, or to acknowledge that there's other modalities of healing, and which is what I ultimately ended up choosing, which led me to healing, a scary diagnosis, and then also recognizing that there were a lot of people that are in the system of Western medicine that feel like they don't have a choice. And that so that kind of put me on the path to healing this. And what I was diagnosed with was high grade cervical dysplasia. I was told that I needed 70% of my cervix removed. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, why is this happening to me? All these questions. So I had this like acute healing crisis. But what I learned through that was that there's so many people that are in need of healing that are not necessarily looking at their own process through the lens of choice. They feel stuck and they feel hopeless a lot. And that a lot of us end up suffering because of choices that we've made throughout our lives unknowingly, often that we're living arrhythmically. And maybe we can get into how Ayurveda looks at health and well-being, because it's a paradigm shift from what we're often taught from a Western perspective. And so there is suffering that is inherent in life, like we're going to lose people that we love. We're going to have disappointment. And those types of sufferings help us be human. And then there's unnecessary suffering that comes from ways in which we've set ourselves up to suffer. And it's all often unknowingly that we are making choices like not sleeping at night, like staying up, or like eating really late in the day and then going to sleep before our food is digested. Or maybe we can get into some of these rhythmic patterns too. But the unnecessary suffering comes in when we recognize that we're part of nature, and that if we are living out of alignment with nature, so the unnecessary suffering shows up when we're out of rhythm with the flow of nature, which we are inherently a part of, although we have things like electricity and we can pretend that it's day when it's night, or we can heat our houses to really hot and pretend it's summer when it's actually winter. But we express ease when we're living in alignment with our true nature, which is elemental, and the wisdom of nature, which is really what Ayurveda is all about. So
Yeah, so is the unnecessary suffering has to do with choice, perhaps, when there's a healthier choice to make, and we see that choice, but instead choose to do something else?
I think it's often unconscious and we don't see the choice. So part of what I am striving to do through the work that I do is to help people see that there's always choice. And when they understand their individual constitution and how to live in alignment with the seasons and alignment with their life stages, then they can make more informed and supportive decisions in their lives.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I wonder if it's unconscious, can it also be unnecessary? Because if I'm not aware of it, then in a way it has to be necessary, perhaps to bring me into consciousness, right? Like through the pain and suffering, like I had to experience that in order to be conscious and therefore have awareness regarding choices that I might not have been aware of before.
Right. Absolutely. So all of us are going to have some unnecessary suffering in our lives. And hopefully we learn from that. And in Ayurveda, it's seen that there are three main causes of disease. And one of them is called prajnaparada, which maybe you're familiar with. And we can basically translate that as not learning from past mistakes, right? So we can know something like, if I drink alcohol, then I don't sleep very well, or it gives me a headache. But yet we continue to do it. And then we say, why do I feel so bad? Or we get angry at our bodies, like, body, why are you failing me? Right.
Mhm.
And instead, it's our own negligence. We're not learning from past mistakes. Like, alcohol doesn't agree with you. So, and for most people, certain patterns are going to be the most beneficial. So, we hear that expression, like we learn the same lesson over and over and over again until we're willing to
Mhm.
change it. Or like the quote that's attributed to Einstein, that's like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's basically what prajnaparada is. It's like, when are you going to recognize that, like, when it's winter you need more clothing on when you go outside? Or like when you're when you get up before the sunrise, you have more energy for the day, but you insist on sleeping in, right? That there's these patterns that we can be like, aha, like I recognize this and I can make a better decision for myself. And I think this is really challenging right now when we exist in a time where we're trained to be incredibly passive about our own choices,
Mhm.
you know? And we're just kind of like, I mean, behavior science shows us that we have the habits of the five people that we interact with the most. And so, look at who you're interacting with the most. And are their behaviors and their patterns, their habits, ones that you want to emulate? And if they're not, then you need to take action to actually put yourself in community with people that have patterns and habits that you actually are like uplifted by and inspired by and are excited when you embody them. Okay.
Mhm.
And so that trajectory of like, we are influenced by who we're around. We are trained to be like, we think of freedom as being able to do whatever we want, whenever we want. But that is actually incredibly paralyzing. And what actually creates freedom for us is when we have some structure that we can like lean back into the support of and be like, oh, I know, like, if we just know when we're going to bed each day, what time we're eating our meals, and when we're waking up, like that creates a lot of freedom, because then we're like, oh, here's the periods of time where I'm available for other things, and here's when I'm not, right? So we can really begin to shift this whole paradigm of like, what is suffering? What's freedom? Where do we learn? How do we be awake in the world? All of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of something that I read that you wrote that I really love and try to remember myself is that make your life a work of art.
Mm.
And I wonder if this is connected to that, right? Like even in regard to children, we know that it's like obvious that children want that structure, right? Well, they want the freedom and they want the structure, right? So it's this constant play, and that's why I feel like it's art between freedom and structure, right? And too much of either, right, does not really do it. So it's like this never-ending search for that sweet spot in our lives between that structure, that container that we've created, and allowing us to feel free and spontaneous.
Right. And I would say that the spontaneity is available when we have enough structure. Otherwise, we're anxious and overwhelmed. So that just like kids, we were talking before we started recording that we both have kids, and the kids need to know, like, when they have the freedom to, go out in the woods and play, right? And when it's time to come home for dinner, or when it's time to get up to go to school in the morning. Everything is not on the table to be negotiated, right? There are some structures there. But because those structures are there, then there's like, yay, this is the time when we can do this thing that's more spontaneous or more creative. And so, what I've seen in my own life and in the lives of my clients too is that as we implement really supportive structure, not rigidity, but structure, that we end up feeling like time and space warp, actually, and that there's more time and space that open up.
Mm.
And that then it feels like there's more inspiration, like that literal like inhale. You can like be like, right? Instead of just being like, what am I doing next? What's happening? I don't really have my ducks in a row, as we might say, right? That structure really, really does create that freedom. And you think about if you just told your kids, like, you can do whatever you want whenever you want. Like, what kind of chaos? Like, you have little kids, so they might end up having meltdowns because they like didn't think to eat or take a nap, or right. Like,
Yeah.
we're similar.
Right. At the same time, I think this path has to be um, an individual one, right? Like, it's for us
Absolutely.
to create for ourselves. So some of what I notice is that often people throughout their childhood have the structure created for them, and
Mhm.
then become an adult and have total freedom, and are used to having someone else tell them where their boundaries are, but are not used to setting up their own boundaries. So I'd say for a parent, even it's the next level. It's like working with your child to establish boundaries together so that they get in the habit of creating that structure for themselves so that they can feel more free. I notice a lot, and for myself, I could say like that was a big deal, like, right, like becoming an adult, like, okay, like now no one else is telling me what to do. I'm not used to that. I haven't been practicing that. My whole life so far has been other people telling me what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say Ayurveda is such a blessing in line with that, because there are some kind of universal patterns of what we might call chronobiology in modern sense, but what we call dinacharya, which are the daily rhythms, like living in alignment with the day-night cycles, and then living in alignment with the seasonal cycles. Those are pretty universal. Like, they're principles that all humans can benefit from. But then within that, understanding our individual, unique constitutions that is elemental helps us further refine that. So, depending on kind of what predominant elements we have individually, we can tailor whatever structure we're cultivating to that, and then understand that some things that other people are doing work for them but not for us, and it's really understanding there's no one size fits all, but there are general principles that will really help every living organism. Like, we're diurnal creatures, we're not nocturnal. Living out of rhythm with the day and night will eventually create a dis-ease pattern because we're living out of the rhythm, the flow of ease. So that's why I love doing what I'm doing, because I'm teaching these basic principles that almost everybody that comes to work with me says, why don't we learn this in kindergarten? Because it's so important to understand like how we're designed to function. And when we get in those rhythms, then it's like there's so much more ease and space and time that open up. And then there's these really individual pieces of like, our elemental imbalances and tendencies that we can really tend to from a place of like listening with the ear of our hearts instead of being like, why am I like that? Like, I'm different or weird or wrong or bad, or, we put all these labels on it. But it's like, no, this is like where you are your own special recipe of these elements. And here's how to tend to that. Like, everything comes with the balance of like, it's both a superpower and a challenge, perhaps, and learning how to live into that from a place of gratitude for it all, that we're unique, is really beautiful. So I love being able to do that with Ayurveda.
Uh, yeah, I really appreciate this, the awareness around there being basic principles that are healthy for all of us to be aware of. And then on top of that, or simultaneously tapping into our individual uniqueness that could look very different than another person. That feels so true to me. How were you first introduced to Ayurveda?
I actually went to an Ayurveda workshop at a music and arts festival that I was at in Asheville, North Carolina. I don't know, in my early 20s, I think. And I was just kind of like, it didn't really hook me at that time. And then I had another little introduction to it when I was doing my yoga teacher training. There's I'll probably have this too, in a YTT, there's a 2-hour session on Ayurveda for a 200-hour yoga teacher training. So I had that. And again, I was like, that's interesting, but it didn't really grab me. It wasn't until I was dealing with my own health challenges and kind of life issues of challenging relationship and like all sorts of things that I was like, I was a yoga teacher. So I started teaching yoga in 2004. And so I was a yoga teacher long before I studied Ayurveda. And what I found was that a lot of people who were students of mine saw me as some sort of font of knowledge about health because I was a yoga teacher. And so they started coming to me and being like, hey, do you have any recommendations for like sleep or digestive issues or whatever? And I've always been interested in health and have definitely focused on like food as medicine and alternative healing throughout my life. But I was really struggling. And so I'd have people come to me and I'm like, I can't even figure out my own stuff. Like, why am I seen as some sort of resource for other people? And then I was like, I want to study more of this. And I was like, should I go get it like a nutrition certification? And then I was just like, well, Ayurveda is the sister science to yoga. I'm already really into yoga. Why don't I just study that? And so when I went to Ayurveda school initially, I was both like training to become, at that point, an Ayurveda health counselor, and then also healing my own imbalances and disease states. And so I went through a lot of healing with that. And I was like, great, I get this. It makes so much sense to me. So that was in 2015 that I went to that initial school. And then since then, I've gone back to school and gotten my Ayurveda practitioner certification.
You feel grateful to have discovered Ayurveda?
Yeah, I mean, I often say that I feel like it saved my life. And I mean that with total humility. Like, I really was not doing well, physically, mentally, emotionally. And Ayurveda gave me a framework to understand myself in a way that helped me know that I wasn't somehow faulty or wrong or bad. And that everything that I was experiencing was simply an imbalance, which I felt like was so empowering, because if there's an imbalance, it means that balance is possible, right?
Mhm.
And Ayurveda works so beautifully with food and lifestyle and herbs. And so if there's one avenue that doesn't work or somebody's not open to, it's like there's always another avenue to try. It's like, if we have options. I mean, back to like, we always have choice. We always have possibilities. And so, yeah, through my own healing, and then now I've been in practice um, for 8 years, that it's just been incredible to see. It's an empowerment process. It's not just like, take this and you'll be all better. It's really about identity evolution and building a relationship with the self that is way more loving and compassionate than most of us have cultivated up to this point in our lives. Yeah, so I'm incredibly grateful, and I'm incredibly grateful to now help empower and support other women on their path too.
How does it build that relationship with the self that's more compassionate?
Well, like I was saying, that when you understand your constitution, so I'll give you specific examples here. So um, actually, can I just do a little brief introduction to Ayurveda? So we
Yeah,
have a
go for it. Go for it.
little framework of what this is. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce Ayurveda and then give you the concept of like what that looks like for me and my own healing. So Ayurveda originated in India over 5,000 years ago, which I like to point out that things that don't work don't stick around. Ayurveda has been around for a really long time, and was even sent underground by British rule in India, but has persisted. And now I think it's even more popular in the West than in India. It's seen as the sister science to yoga. It's like how do you live your life? Yoga is very much the spiritual path, and Ayurveda is the householder path, like food and work and scheduling, and how do we tend to just this living a life thing. And so Ayurveda is a 5-element system that started in India and then traveled through Asia and transformed into Chinese medicine and Tibetan medicine as it grew. So the 5 elements in Ayurveda are space, air, fire, water, and earth. And those 5 elements make up everything, whether it's a mental pattern or qualities of food or the time of the year, how our body type, all
Even
sorts
a mental pattern is made up of those elements.
Yes, everything is made up of those 5 elements.
Is there a specific element that the mental pattern is
Well, all
connected
of
with?
no, they can be any mental patterns can be any of the elements.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and maybe this will make sense in a moment. Let me explain a little bit more. So there's these 5 elements, and then Ayurveda further simplifies our understanding of these elements into what we call doshas. And dosha can be translated as energy or constitution or fault. So if we think about the fault lines in the earth, like where the tectonic plates shift, that's like dosha. It's like where things can go out of balance. And so we can look at dosha from this perspective of constitution, energy, and also where things can shift and go out of balance. So there's 3 doshas in Ayurveda, and they're each made up of 2 elements. So the first one is called Vata dosha, and it's made up of air and space. The second one is Pitta dosha, and it's made up of fire and water. And the third is Kapha dosha, and it is made up of earth and water. So all of us have all 3 doshas in us, but just in differing amounts. And some of them can show up, sometimes it'll show up where we're more predominant mentally in one dosha and more predominant with another dosha physically. And then we have doshas that govern the times of the day. There's 4-hour chunks of time throughout the day that are governed by each of the doshic energies. So we go through 2 cycles of each doshic energy in a 24-hour period. The doshas govern the seasons throughout the year, and the doshas govern our life stages. So there's always this conversation of personal constitution, personal imbalance, where we've gotten out of whack, layered with the time of the day, the season, and our life stage. So it's very unique and interesting to get into those conversations. So let me come back to, well, Ayurveda basically like gives us an owner's manual for like uniquely who we are, body, mind, and spirit. And this is what's really exciting. And this comes back to that compassionate piece of being like, oh, this is how I work, right? So for me, I am Vata Pitta predominant. So I am predominantly Vata with a high secondary Pitta. I hardly have any Kapha in me. I'm more Pitta in my mind and more Vata in my body. So just to review, Vata is air and space. So physically, I'm thin. I have bony popping joints. I tend towards dryness in my body. So a lot of my earlier symptoms had to do with dryness, from constipation to dry mucosal membranes. I had a lot of allergy issues, things like that. And then also in the mind, that air and space imbalance can show up as anxiety. And so I dealt with all of these things for decades. Pitta is the fire and water, and that shows up imbalance wise as heat issues in the body. So I didn't have so much of that in my healing. But I've kind of unearthed more of my Pitta over the time of healing my Vata imbalance, because the Vata kind of scatteredness, and you can think of just the energy as like kind of swirling around in the ether, like, and my Pitta has helped really bring that down and put in more structure, and I've kind of unearthed that and built a coaching company and have people working for me, and a lot more of that skill of a vision and intention and seeing things through in steps. That's very, very Pitta. But I have some physical Pitta characteristics. I have very Pitta skin. I am very rosy and freckly. That's very Pitta. And I have kind of intense eyes. And so this, and rosy cheeks, like that's very like Pitta shows up physically that way for me. So in terms of the compassion part, back to your original question, my journey there was, my first career was as a high school art teacher. And so I was doing a lot of, building curriculum and doing, so my background's in the arts, and I have, and that's a more of a Vata characteristic, is like very creative. And so I was kind of living into that superpower while also dealing with all of these Vata imbalances of insomnia and, constipation and all sorts of allergies and other things that I had mentioned before. So bringing the awareness of Ayurveda, the understanding of Ayurveda, I was able to overlay that lens and be like, oh, that's why. That's why. And one of the characteristics of Vata is that it's variable. So it's kind of all over the place. Like sometimes you'll sleep well and sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll digest well and sometimes you won't. And sometimes you'll, like all these, it's like things are all over the place. And I had evolved in such a way with that variability, not knowing how to be in conversation with it, into a conversation where I felt like I couldn't trust myself. Like I was kind of like, I don't know if I'll be okay, to do whatever, I mean, I was functioning to the outside world. I think I looked like totally fine. But inside I was struggling a lot. And so that awareness of like, oh, the Vata is going to be insomnia and constipation and anxiety, and like, whoa, I just have so much Vata imbalance. That's so cool, because now I can implement Vata balancing food, Vata balancing routine and lifestyle choices, Vata balancing herbs. And holy moly, it changed my whole life. And so that part of the compassion is just like, to be like, I I just feel like that conversation of like, I'm here for you, to the internal you, right? I'm here for you. We're going to figure this out together, not cut it out, stop that. It's not a punitive, like whipping yourself back into shape. It's more like let me hear what's actually happening. And as we understand that conversation of dosha, we're able to be like, oh, this imbalance is showing up over here. This imbalance is showing up over here. And we have the tools to bring us back into balance without just spinning out, whether it's, with pitta that you were asking before about the mental states, like and this is imbalance. I mentioned vata goes into anxiety, pitta goes into anger, and kapha goes into stagnation or brain fog. So we can all kind of move in and out of those states, and they're often tied to the seasons of the year too, which would correlate with the predominant dosha of that time of the year. But we can also like recognize when we start going down those paths, and for a lot of us, those are samskaras, well-worn paths that we're like, oh, yep, I'm back in the rut, and I know how this goes. And we can start a different conversation internally of like, oh, if that's an imbalance, like if I'm just too caught up in the air element or too much fire right now or too much earth that's feeling, making me feel groggy or lethargic, I can bring in, this is the secret to Ayurveda, which is the wisdom of opposites. So if something's, hot, we cool it down. If something's dry, we bring in moisture. And we can do this with, physical things and also mental. And so it's so exciting. I mean, I hope you're beginning to see like just the breadth of how much this, I mean, a lot of people say, oh, you practice Ayurveda, you tell people how to eat. And I'm like, oh, that's like a small part of it.
Yeah, what you're sharing is really connecting to how we started the conversation, also around unnecessary suffering and your mission. And one of the things I was going to ask is, so like, why does that happen? Why do we repeat behaviors that we know are going to lead to suffering, right? Like the Einstein quote. And I wonder if there's something underneath that for all of us. Like we talk about just kind of the basic principles, right? And what I'm really interested in is kind of this habit of taking myself too seriously, right? Which it gets in the way of growth, of learning itself. And also what you were speaking about in regard to the people that we spend the most time with influencing us, right? I think society on a larger level, and this is kind of unnatural, right? And having children makes me realize this too. It's kind of like, coming into the system where everyone takes their identity and who they are like really, really seriously to a level that I don't know if it makes a lot of sense or right. And that gets in the way of all of this. And so what I'm sensing is that Ayurveda is in a way, it's a way out. And even maybe broader is just this belief or understanding that I am a part of nature, right? What you said, like that's like like I don't need to take myself so seriously. Like I just am the way that I am. I am this part of nature. I'm made up of whatever I'm made up of. And I can understand what that is particular to myself. And then I can start to make changes. Right. But it's like this, I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious even what Ayurveda makes out of the ego or right. Like this, because that's also natural. One thing that I remind myself is that like, where is nature not? Right. And everything does serve a function. So the ego itself is also serving a function, but maybe has just had too large of a role and it needs to come into more of a balance. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely. Well, yeah, you just said a lot there. That I want to respond to different aspects of what you just said. Specifically about the ego and being part of nature. I mean, I think a concept that is very challenging to a lot of people in our modern culture is that we are made of elements and will return to elements. And sometimes I talk about it as like we eat food and eventually we will be food, right? Like a lot of people don't want to think about that cycle and that we're part of it. And so when we look at the ego, it's like this, yeah, this like me and my and that we're building it up. I think the ego has a healthy place in our evolution for sure, and we need it. But yes, our culture has been so focused on that. And I love that you said, like, when you think, oh, I'm part of nature, there's like this, it's like you can kind of relax and just be like, oh, yeah, I belong. I belong here. I'm a part of something bigger. I think that's what all of these ancient wisdom traditions are teaching us constantly, and why they still exist, because we still need them, because they have this brilliance. I mean, if we look at the yamas and the niyamas, this is from the yogic tradition, but svadhyaya is the practice of self-study, right? And so and we need meditation really to be able to be like the observer of how is the mind working? How are we making decisions? What are the things that are compelling to us that make us decide certain things versus and when you say like things that serve us and things that don't serve us, right? We may be taking our cues from the external world. We could use the example of being at a birthday party and knowing that gluten or dairy or sugar doesn't serve us, doesn't make us feel good, maybe body, mind, spirit, right? And yet we start looking around and everybody at the birthday party is eating the chocolate cake, right? And we're like, if they can do it, so can I. And that's false perception, right? Because then we're abandoning the self and saying that I'm like these people over here. And who knows what their experience is, right? They might eat the cake and feel awful too. But it's our responsibility to care here, right? And to stay in that deeper alignment. And when we can know where those boundaries are. I mean, I would also say, like, as we heal our gut, which is really a big focus of Ayurveda too, if we have food allergies, and this has been part of my journey, like I used to be gluten and dairy free, and now I can have some of both. And it's really an awesome part of the healing process, But as we're able to see that we're not stuck, that we have choice, that there's an honoring of where we are at each moment and that we will always be changing, why not cultivate that intentionally versus like be pushed around by the forces around us, I mean, even by being at Yogaville, right? Like you've created a really intentional life to like live at an ashram, right? And participate in a certain lifestyle to raise your children in that environment. That is very different than most parents who have children your age in this country who are just kind of like, well, we live in this neighborhood and like, they're going to go to this local school and, we got to work and right. There's an intentionality that comes in. And I think that comes through meditation, through self-study. And those are parts of Ayurveda too. It's all woven together. But does that kind of answer what you were getting?
Yeah. It's like this distance between, maybe we call it, in yoga, the small s and the big S, the little self and the big self, right? It allows for so much growth, I think, if I, step back and look at myself and I'm not grasping, so hard on what I am, then I can, a big moment of my life is actually when I started to see myself in the third person and ask the question, like, what does Avi need? Because I saw that if that there seems to be a lot of right focus on what I don't control, which ultimately leads to so much suffering, right? It's like when the mind is focused on all these things that it doesn't control, that can lead to a feeling of helplessness, right? Uh, Therefore, it made a lot more sense to focus on the being that I can change, right? Not out of a sense of selfishness, but out of a sense of practicality, and seeing that if I do that clearly, knowing for sure that this instrument, this being will be of the most use to other people, that it's not a selfish thing. It's actually like the opposite thing. So just asking the
Yeah.
question, like, what does Avi need? Like community, right? Like people around me that are a good influence, like exactly what you were talking about. Um, so it's like very cool, I think, to me to step back and just keep asking that question and have it be like this little game of never ending improvement. Now, I want to ask you about, talking about like the chocolate cake, right? Eating and whatever it is, all sorts of things. I think relate to this is there seems to be a play between short term and long term in life in regard to decision making, right? So I don't think it's just like right, eating that cake is not all negative, even if I feel bad later, right? Like there is something that I get from it, whether it's the initial, high and rush of a flavor or simply to be included with other people and participate one. Like I'm getting something from that right now in this moment, which is why it's such a hard thing to change because that is very real. At the same time, right, it could make the whole rest of my day not as good as it would be if I made a different choice. So, yeah, what does Ayurveda say something about like these decisions that we're making in regard to short and long term?
Yes. um, yeah. And so the way that I work with people is over the course of a year. And so that allows us to go through every season and to implement habit change over time. I'm prefacing my answer with that because I think it's a unique way of working. And especially like as a healthcare practitioner, it's an interesting model because what ultimately we're moving towards is habit change and then identity evolution so that we are no longer the same person that we were, and not everybody's up for this journey, but the people that come to work with me are. And one of the things that I teach in that program, it's called the Vitality Circle, is that we aim for a solid B minus, or we want to do what we know is beneficial long term for us 80% of the time. And then 20% of the time, have fun, no guilt, no shame. Right? What we don't want is to, like, what I really work with my clients on is to not get in the I fell off the wagon mentality or I failed. It's like, no, you had the chocolate cake. How was it? Did you enjoy it? Was it so nice to have your Aunt Claire's recipe? Like, what about it? Like, exactly what you were saying. What about it was affirming and exciting and enjoyable to you? Those pieces are so key. And, I love that you brought that up because we're always experiencing everything on multiple levels, right? At the same time, I would say, depending on how that chocolate cake affects you, could you instead, if it's a horrible effect, if you're going to be run into the toilet for 2 days afterwards, could you instead be like, if I ate that chocolate cake, what emotionally would it give me? Oh, it's connection with my family. It's, being able to share in this celebration. Okay, how could you do those things without actually putting that chocolate cake in your body? Right?
Mhm.
So, can you focus on Who's going to be at that party that you really want to make sure to have an emotional connection with? Could you take a little treat with you that's in your purse or bag that's just like when everybody else is having the chocolate cake, you get to eat your dates with almond butter with cacao nibs that are like so yummy to you, you know? What about that experience empowers you, right? So we want to keep coming back to, if we are making the decision to eat the chocolate cake, that it's an empowering decision. And if eating the chocolate cake is not empowering, what would be empowering, right? So that perspective is a huge shift for a lot of people. To recognize I'm not a victim of this circumstance. I'm not a failure. Something's not wrong with me. I'm in this process of healing and growing and evolving in a way that, like, I mean, some sort of milestone with that might be, next year being able to eat the chocolate cake. But what's bigger is that personal evolution of honoring and listening to that inner guidance. But the solid B minus is what we aim for, And I think this is important when we're traveling too, when we're on other people's schedules or in other people's homes or at a restaurant or whatever. It's like, embrace it, enjoy it, At the same time, don't go totally, wild and make choices that are going to be detrimental to you, right?
Yeah.
Middle
I love
path.
this. I love the solid B minus. It's so compassionate, right? And it's very aware of how change actually happens, which I think is slowly, from my experience, right? Like jumping into the deep end. Maybe that works for other people. I haven't really seen it, to be honest. Often that it's like a ping-ponging effect, like
because because we are indoctrinated into all or nothing, black or white thinking. And this is very Pitta, that thinking. And that's a big shift too. And another reason why I work with people over the course of a year is that so we focus on implementing these Ayurvedic habits, but what we're really working on is behavioral science. What's underneath that is our minds.
Yeah.
We're working with our minds. What do we believe? And what then does that allow in our lives? So, Ayurveda is kind of this doorway into this greater exploration of who we are. So if we can come to this concept of small incremental change over time, I have my clients set goals for themselves each season, and I have them make them so small, so tiny, so appealing to them that they can't not do them.
Yeah.
And that is way more productive in the long run in terms of that identity evolution. And so as an example, like if somebody is like, I want to meditate every day, but they're not meditating at all when they first start, meditating every day, not going to happen probably, right? Yeah. But if we say, set the goal, meditate 2 minutes twice a week, they're going to be super overachievers, but they're going to make those 4 minutes a week happen at least, right? Then that starts to build the self-trust, the identity evolution. And that's where I think we miss out. There's a lot of programs out there that are, telling people what to do, but not how to actually make the change and not how to engage with their individual way of interacting, seeing the world. For that mindset that's very Pitta, black or white, all or nothing. Pitta. Kapha will be scared to start because they kind of don't want to be uncomfortable. So they would rather stay in the known. And so
that's big.
Yeah. And so they need a lot of cheerleading and accountability and people being there to motivate them, right? Pitta doesn't need that. They've got their own inner motivation, their own fire. What they need to do is hold back the reins, right? Be like, I'm not going to do it all right now. Vata needs the structure. They're going to be multitasking, ping ponging all over the place. And so they need to really specifically be like, this is what's happening at this time, and I'm sticking to this schedule. Now, all of these tendencies for Vata Pitta predominant folks, at first they're going to balk at it. I hated structure. I was an artist and a musician, and I wanted to do whatever I wanted to, whenever I wanted to. Once I brought in structure into my life, holy moly, everything healed, But I was so scared that I was going to lose my artistic inspiration, if I couldn't stay up till the wee hours of the morning writing songs, or, now I wake up in the wee hours of the morning to meditate, connect with the muse that way. There's just these different ways of conceiving of things. And I realize our conversation today has gone way more in the direction of the mind. And to get there, we really have to come through, coming into understanding of the elements and the doshas and all of that. And that, like when I was an art teacher, I used to tell my students, learn the techniques and then break the rules. Right? So it's kind of like we need the foundations of things that have been tried and true. We're not figuring it out up for ourselves for the first time. Like this stuff's been around for thousands of years. Let's learn that. And then we get to run experiments, right? We get to be like, I wonder if I do this, what would happen? And that's really fun. A lot of what Ayurveda asks of us is to run experiments and to stay in the conversation. We're always changing. The seasons are always changing. That means what we're eating, what we're focusing on, how we're moving our bodies. All of these things have subtle changes too. And I think it's a really fun and wonderful way to be alive in the world. And I realize we're coming to the end of our time. One of the things that we were talking about before we started recording is just like, what does it mean to be human right now in the world? And I just want to say a little bit about that, because I think these ancient healing traditions are becoming more and more and more important for us to embody and understand as we're at this precipice of potentially losing our humanness to a technological world. And there's wonderful aspects to technology, but I think we also need to acknowledge that we are not technology. We are human. And by being human, we are part of nature. And being part of nature also embodies a certain amount of the miraculous. That there's nothing in technology that will ever be able to be the spark of human divinity, really. That we have something that science will never be able to dissect or take apart. It's like we can understand so much about the body and the mind as we can, move everything into these parts and pieces and categories and labels and names. At the end of the day, there's still something that is there that is ineffable. We can't know it. And that's part of the beauty, I think, of these ancient healing traditions like Ayurveda, which is that we honor that is there, and understanding how we can live with our bodies and our minds and our spirits in this lifetime in alignment with the natural world, with the 5 elements. Just seems like the piece that is so needed right now in our world, where so many people feel lost and the only options that they have are medications or surgeries. And there's just so much more. It's a much bigger conversation. So I just really want to encourage everybody who's listening to, just take a moment right now and be like, I'm a miracle. Like the fact that each of us are here, that we exist and that we're here at this time. It's no accident. that we are here to learn and embody and to share and to connect and to heal. I think everybody's a healer. Everybody's amazing in their own way that's unique and powerful in their own expression. And that's where I think understanding yourself from an Ayurvedic perspective is so exciting, because then you can be like, these are my superpowers and these are the things that I'm really good at. And I think it also, it makes us more compassionate towards ourselves. It makes us more compassionate towards each other, and it helps us get out of the comparing mind. Like, we're all unique. We're not here to be the same. We're not here to try to, be exact cookie cutter, of each other. It's like, who are you? What magic do you bring? What's alive in your life right now? That's really, really exciting. And so, yeah, in everything that I teach, that I bring that curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah. The curiosity feels really human.
Yes.
Very, very natural as it gets. In what you're just sharing, the word mystery kind of came to my mind. It's like living in this mystery, being okay with the unknown, seems to be essential, right? Like a genuine humility too. Like as a human being, I can know so much, and there's so much that I will never know or never understand, and I can be okay with that. I think like on this road of whatever we call it, betterment, of sorts, and that's essential. It's like understanding that, I don't even understand how much better it can be until I experience it, right? And that's often like the biggest obstacle, right? Is that I really have no idea how much better I can feel until I feel that way. So let's see. And then I feel that way. And then the same thing again. It's like, it never ends. One of my good friends here spent a lot of time with Swami Satchidananda, and that's what she said. She always reminds me of advice that he gave to her. It's like, just rise above where you think you are, just rise above and rise above again. And it's like, that really sticks with me, because that's my experience too. And it can be a little scary that there's always more, but it's amazing and it's so cool. And I've learned that I can be okay with never ending learning, never ending growth. And that feels very appropriate,
Yeah, I think that's what we're here for, and that's the life journey. And again, we can engage with that intentionally, or life will bring us our lessons, even if we try to like control everything and keep everything, the same, it will bring us our lessons and our invitations to growth. And yeah, so I think again, curiosity is really, really the name of the game. And I think too, with all that's happening in our greater world, I think joy and connectivity are two of our greatest sources of power. And I think about there's this great Mary Oliver poem, and there's a line in there. She says, "Hallelujah, anyhow." It's like that expression feels so uplifting in times that are so so challenging and crushing to our souls. And to be curious, like, ooh, where could this lead us, or what could come out of this, or who can I connect with now because of this, and then to celebrate all of that. Hallelujah, anyhow. And just seeing as the world feels so volatile and chaotic, nature is something that reminds us that there is some predictability that we can count on. We can count on the sun rising, we can count on the sun setting, we can count on the equinoxes and the solstices. And, these rhythms are what we are built out of too. And so coming back to them is so incredibly grounding and nourishing, and reminding ourselves that in the big scheme of things, where we are in the scope of humanity is the tiny blip on the radar. Yeah. And here we are. This life will go by so quickly. And can we get curious about that potentiality? I love that. Yeah. Like, keep raising, keep growing, keep exploring. Because the alternative is kind of stagnation, and that's numbing and kind of deadening to the spirit. We only get to be here for a short amount of time. Why not? Why not go for it?
Why not go for it? It's one more thing I wanted to ask you about. I know you have a couple programs coming up at Yogaville in the fall. I was particularly interested in your program, The Dosha of Relationship. Do you want to say anything just about relationships and Ayurveda and maybe what the focus of that program will be?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for that invitation. I realized we didn't really get into, we got into dosha as personality a little bit today, but not so much as a relationship. So this takes it a step further into looking at if we understand ourselves from a doshic perspective, then bring us into relationship with other people. And it gets even more interesting, right? So, balancing our understanding for ourselves and our tendencies, and then also what those are for other people. So this can be for people who are in partnership. So couples might want to attend, but it could also be for people that are either single and seeking partnership, or for people that are just wanting to understand how they interact with folks in their family or in their workplace or whatever. It can be applied in lots of different ways. And so it really helps us look at how we can understand other people and then gear our ways of interacting with them into ways that are more productive and supportive. Because a lot of us can get really stuck in, well, I see things this way and they need to happen this way. And then be like, oh, well, doshically, this person wants, we'll need more of this, right? And so it makes it a little less personal. And again, more compassion comes in, more connectivity. So it's really beautiful. And my partner, David, will be joining me for that as well. So you'll get to see us. So you all, I told you that I'm Vata Pitta. He's Kapha Pitta. So he has a lot of earth and water and some fire. And so, we will be sharing some about our partnership and how that works with us understanding where we're coming from a doshic perspective as well. So there'll be a basic introduction to Ayurveda. You don't have to know anything ahead of time to attend this weekend. And then we'll move into this awareness of relationship. So again, so many people think Ayurveda is all just about food. It's like, no, it even impacts your relationship. Well, what I get asked a lot with food is, well, if I have people in my household that are other doshas, how do we eat a meal together? So we will be talking about that too. It's just like, how do we share food and have different doshic makeups? And it's not as complicated as you think. And then also going into more of the relationship skills and connection tools through the lens of dosha. So it's going to be really fun. And yeah, I'm really excited. This is the first time I've expanded it into a weekend. I usually do it as a 3-hour workshop. So I'm really excited to get into more in-depth explorations and engagement with whoever comes. So
Wonderful. And if someone is interested in kind of finding out more about you, working with you one-on-one, learning about these programs, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so my website is heartfeltwellbeing.com, and you can find out everything there. There's lots of information there. I have a YouTube channel and a Facebook page. You can take a dosha quiz on my website if you're curious what your dosha is, and then it'll put you in a little email sequence for you to learn more about your dosha. So have fun with that if you want to. That's all free. And there's lots of conversations about Ayurveda on my YouTube channel and Facebook page. And then there's information about programs. I lead detoxes twice a year. And then Vitality Circle is a year-long program, as I mentioned before, for women. And then I have a course that's like a self-paced course for women called Evolve. So check out those things. I also lead in-person and online retreats. And so there's kind of something for everybody. Yeah, so I'll be at Yogaville in September leading a program called Intro to Practical Ayurveda, which if Ayurveda is totally new to you, this would be a great experience. And I make things very interactive and fun. You can probably tell I'm pretty passionate about this. So that'll be really fun. And then the dosha of relationship will be in December. And I'm really looking forward to being back at Yogaville. And I was a light in 2011. So my first time back to Yogaville was last September when I taught Intro to Practical Ayurveda. And it just felt like a homecoming. I was so happy to be back there. And it also made me reflect on how much in my life has changed since I was there in 2011. And it was just so wonderful. And so I'm super honored to be invited back for not just one, but 2 workshops this year, and really looking forward to it. Such a special place.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Anna, for making the time to do this. Thank you for being the person you are and for following your Dharma. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this content and think others might as well, please feel free to share and subscribe.